We listen to music for various genres that we may deliberately like, or we know the music or song influences us. What if the musician we love has passed away? Of course, this musician left us all, and all that's left is the music. Throughout the history of the music industry, many musicians has passed away, leaving all the unreleased works. This may sound cliche, but this is art. Yes, we're talking about posthumous music. You ever heard? Or do you already know? So in Music 101, I'll give an explanation about the posthumous in music, which basically become knowledge for us. Again? Yes, before that we will go back to history where posthumous work in music, and of course they are good and bad in the music industry. In 1934, Freddie Coppin composed a piano solo called Fantasy Impromptu. Impromptu is a composition born in improvisation and does not have a formal standard structure. The end result is something that sounds spontaneous. This work is the first in the fourth series of impromptu written by Chopin. If you know, the other three, namely Ops 29, Ops 36, Ops 51 was released during his lifetime, and Ops 66 being the only one not published. You know, because there are some tonal and melodic similarities between Ops 66 with Ludwig van Beethoven, more like sonata. Prior to his death, Chopin specifically instructed that many of his unpublished manuscripts be released to the public after his death. However, these instructions are not aligned with what is happening in the real world. It was a posthumous form in the past centuries, and we go back to the modern time. You know, many works are a tribute to artists after their death, even when someone else has contributed substantially to the content of work, or when the works left incomplete by the artist is deemed by any standard of completion. Yeah, the situation is not so clear-cut. However, the cases posthumous work in the traditional collaboration, two or more people work together to complete a work, coordinating their mind and action. But of course, it posthumously completed works. There are no real sense of collaboration to be had, so the special conundrum arises for posthumous work. On the one hand, multiple artists contribute to the particular work, but on the other, they do not do so collaboratively in any meaningful sense. So yeah, the short thing, posthumous work is a work after the person who owned it is gone. And you asking how ethical our posthumous music is? You don't remember when Kurt Cobain in Nirvana appeared on MTV's Unplugged show in New York in December 1993?
Come as you are, as you were, as I want you to be, as a friend, as a friend, as unknown enemy.
The actual album didn't become available until November of 1984, nearly 6 months after Cobain has taken his own life. It was 45 minutes long, and personally I love the track Comme Tu Es. It's a great song from the unplugged version or original version of the music video. And I think that's the one example of the best posthumous thing that can be given to fans before they gone. You know, in the cold retrospect, many view Nirvana's MTV Unplugged as a pain and veiled suicide note via the song he loved so much, but others felt that Cobain was simply rising to the occasion and giving us one of his best recorded performances ever. The gentle nature of the track stands in stark contrast to the band's typical grunge sound, capturing the pain Kurt Cobain was experiencing in his final days. In another case, there is Notorious B.I.G. We also go to rap format again. Chillingly titled Life After Death, the Notorious B.I.G. was murdered less than 3 weeks before its release, giving many of the song and narrative a whole new harrowing meaning. You know, B.I.G. couldn't have possibly predicted his fate. Life After Death retained a swagger, a looseness, and celebratory vibe that won the world over. His lyrical skill and charisma nothing short of undeniable, overflowing with samples from soul and rap like Ohio Player, Public Enemy, Diana Ross, and even Rod Stewart. And the track I love on that posthumous album is a More Money, More Problem. A little bit funky, but makes the mood. Okay, as with any better, people can often have differing opinions. Some will argue that it is unethical to release music without the artist's explicit consent, whereas others might say that it shows respect, honor, and love for the artist. Posthumous albums are released or not released for a number of reasons. To generalize, there are two mindset: intended and unintended posthumous albums. In the case of an intended posthumous album, the artists know or suspect that will soon pass away. This means that they know any music they are working on may well be a posthumous album, because releasing an album takes time and isn't as simple as it may seem. In this circumstance, the artists often give a guidance and instruction on how they would like their album to be completed and released. For your information, one of the most well-known examples for another posthumous album is Made in Heaven by Queen in 1995. This was released few years after Freddie Mercury's death. As the title gave away, at the time of recording, Freddie knew that his life was coming to an end. Here's the thing, alternatively, unintended posthumous albums are released when the artist didn't know their death was imminent. This is often comprised of some leftover recording carrying no indication of how, when, or even if the artist wanted them to be released. This can cause some conflict between the record label and family members who may have differing view on what to do with the unfinished work. However, in most cases, everyone may need to come together and finish a released album in a way they think the artist would like. So once an album is released, who gets to profit? This can also be confusing and dependent on a number of factors. If the artist had written the tailwheel, this takes away some of burden, but in the most cases, when the artist is young and doesn't know their life isn't to end, they do not have a will. Usually, the profit goes to the family members. However, when the source lost some money or involved, conflict can arise. The situation is even more complicated if they are contract with record label which show ownership of the artist's work. For this reason, some people believe that it is unethical to profit of the dead person's work when there's no knowledge about who they would have wanted the money to go to. Circles by Mac Miller, which was released on January 17, 2020. Mac's family says that he was actively working on the album shortly before his death and therefore had every intention of releasing it. So in this case, most people will agree that releasing his album was a way of honoring his life rather than trying to make money. And I remember on January 10, 2020, I was listening to his Good News song before his album was released. There's also Lil Peep and X Falling Down in 2018. The collaboration has been brought together posthumously by mutual friends Love McConnen, who co-wrote Falling Down with Peep before his death. So in the first place, a posthumous album is an effective way to pay tribute to the musician and their pass on that musician's legacy to the next generation. When humans die, humans lose their ability both physically and mentally. However, the saying goes that the tiger lived his tribe, humans live their life history behind. And the second conclusion, posthumous rights go hand in hand with both things, the theory of choice and interest. Therefore, it is difficult to determine the good and bad of releasing the posthumous art because it is difficult to know what is in the heart of someone who has died. Other artists may no longer be with us, but that's not the end of the story. How stars dead can impact the chart, people, and civilization to live on.